Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special webinar hosted by the team at Skift and Airline Weekly. I'm Gordon Smith, and today we are asking one big question. Are airlines flying into trouble in 2026? Of course, there's never a dull moment in this industry, but 2026 is shaping up to be a particularly pivotal year. And if there is trouble ahead, will airlines surprise us once again with their resilience? That's what we're here to unpack as we set the scene for the Skift Aviation Forum, which is just 2 weeks away. Due to join us on stage in Fort Worth, Texas on December 3rd are 6 CEOs, including Joanna Garrity and David Neilman, many more, plus senior C-suite executives from carriers including American Airlines, United, Southwest, Alaska, and Air Canada. Last year's event sold out, and we've limited seats remaining for this year. And as a thanks for joining us today on the webinar, we have an exclusive 15% code for you on the screen now. It's webinar attendee. Where it is? There it is. It's webinar attendee. Don't worry if you missed that QR code. We'll share it again at the end of the session. I'm joined today by two people who also live and breathe this beat. First, we have Jay Shabbat. He's a senior analyst and co-founder of Airline Weekly, and I'm sure a familiar face to many of you here on LinkedIn. Jay, great to have you here. And also with us is Meghna Maharishi. She is the airlines reporter at Skift. Meghna's been covering many of the biggest stories of the past year, and many of the key themes that we discussed today are going to be anchored in Meghna's reporting. Meghna, great to have you with us. As always at Skift, we love to hear your questions too, so drop them in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can later in the session. Okay, time to set the stage. A lot of airlines came into 2025 feeling cautiously optimistic, let's say, some even bullishly optimistic, but things, of course, didn't quite go to plan. We had a series of shocks in the spring, which spooked boardrooms, investors, and the flying public. But it seems that for now, at least, the situation has stabilized. It's back to business, especially with the recent end to the US government shutdown. But you don't need to be an aviation historian to know that the good times rarely last. And in this most cyclical of industries, are we entering the new year with justified confidence? So kick us off, Jay, with a quick recap of where we've been in the recent 2022 to 2025 period to set the scene for 2026. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gordon. And thanks real quickly to everybody who's joining today, and appreciate your interest. I hope to see some of you at the Aviation Forum that's coming up in just 2 weeks from now. So we're getting close to the end of the year already.
Real close, yeah.
Yeah, hard to believe. It's time's moving fast. So hope to see everybody there. Anyone who is attending, please be sure to introduce yourselves, say hello, and we always look forward to meeting and speaking with you. I know today on this call, I'm sure have people of varying experience, some newcomers to the industry. I'm sure we have people who are industry veterans as well, people from different regions of the world. So we're going to keep things sort of broad and general and international. We'll leave some time at the end for some questions. You can, type them in, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of them if you have anything specific to your region or to whatever's on your mind. So having said all of that, Gordon asked me to set the stage here on what's kind of been going on over the past couple of years. We're going to call this the post-pandemic period that everybody knows. 2020, 2021 were just the years from hell for the airline industry. There really was no passenger demand to speak of. And then we had what you might call a nice recovery. And again, we're speaking very globally here, very generally. 2022 up through today. Meghna later is going to speak a little bit more about some of the specifics of 2025. But generally speaking, this post-pandemic period is characterized by strong demand. You'll see, most airlines will tell you, even up to and I have some quotes for you I'm going to read you in a second, but airlines will tell you that demand, and especially premium demand, has been pretty good. You'll hear that a lot. If you listen to earnings calls, if you listen to airline presentations, wherever, you'll hear that airline demand is pretty good. And just so you think I'm not giving you stale information here, I did pull a couple of quotes for you. One is just from yesterday, LATAM Airlines, which is the largest airline in Latin America and South America. They said just yesterday, we have seen in general stable and healthy demand in most of the international segments. And they also added that premium revenue is growing faster than capacity. So there you go. You're going to hear us use this word premium a lot today. So there's our first instance of it. The Gol, which is LATAM's rival, their neighbor in Brazil, quote unquote, I think the good news is that demand is resilient. Both leisure and corporate has been responding very well, et cetera, et cetera. Aegean Airlines in Greece, 2025 is shaping up to be another year of solid growth, which further validates our positive momentum. Demand for air travel remains robust, unquote. Sorry to beat a dead horse here, but I'm going to give you a couple more.
Give us another one, Jay. Go on.
I got to give you another one. Just to give you two more, actually, just to spread, just to show you how this is universally spread throughout the earth here. Maybe not every single airline, every single market, but Virgin Australia, we continue to experience strong demand. Simple as that. And here's one from China. Actually, this is not an airline, but Trip.com, which is an online travel agency. Travel is thriving and the travel spirit shows no sign of slowing down. In the third quarter, travel demand surged across markets, led by vibrant domestic travel in China and a steady rise in the outbound journey, unquote. There you go. And don't kill me, but I got one more for you. Okay. This is from the Philippines, Cebu Pacific. And I'm going to mention this one because nice transition to my next point. They said, looking ahead, we remain confident that long-term demand for budget-friendly air travel will stay strong. Now, they added to that, quote, despite strong demand fundamentals, the primary constraint to growth remains on supply-side challenges, specifically engine availability and parts supply, end quote. So that brings me to the next point here, which is that one very, very defining characteristic of the, let's call it again, the post-pandemic era, last 4 years, call it, has been a very constrained supply environment. And that's because of all these production bottlenecks that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We know of Boeing's problems. We know of problems with Pratt & Whitney engines. We know of problems manufacturing premium seats, et cetera, et cetera. That still very much remains the case today. And then the final point on this slide is that, and this is something that, again, when we did this same presentation last year, we mentioned it. Fuel costs have been generally benign. Talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But non-fuel costs, it's been a period of heavy non-fuel cost inflation. That has, I think it's fair to say, has moderated somewhat in 2025. Depends exactly where, depends on exactly what you're talking about. But I think maybe labor costs, for example, is one example where you have some moderation to that inflationary tendency. But that's your situation. And then if you kind of mash it all together, what you get is a period of very, very strong industry profits. And if you look, this is from IATA. And if you look all the way to the right, those two blue bars at the end, what that's really telling you is that 2023 and 2024 were two of the best years in airline industry history. And again, this is aggregate profits, profit margins for the whole, or sorry, this is annual total operating profits for the whole industry. So it's a pretty good story. And you can see those red, I think everybody knows what those two ugly red bars indicate. That's the COVID downturn. And then you can see in that sort of latter half of the 2010s, where you had a period, 4 or 5 year period of pretty decent profitability. And then if we go to the next slide, this explains a lot. I mean, anytime anybody asks you, how are things in the airline industry, you could always ask, well, what's the price of oil? That's always a good starting point. If you know the price of oil, you can sort of conclude how good that given month or year or whatever period you're talking about is. And you can see, so far in 2025, And let me just back up and say that jet fuel, that's what that's what's most relevant. But there's no kind of single jet fuel price that that can vary a little bit by region. So oil price is kind of the best way to talk about this in a very macro sense. And it's going to be pretty indicative of what the jet fuel price is going to be, roughly speaking. So if you look, $67 over the course of the past, recent history, pretty good. I mean, that's pretty, reasonably cheap oil, cheap energy for the airline industry. And, you're talking 30-40% of the entire industry's cost is fuel. So pretty good picture right now. I won't go into, this. It's an interesting chart because you can really tell the story of the industry a lot by just looking, by tracing the patterns here. But if you look, I'll just point out one thing. You could see how in 2014, from 2014 to 2015, you could see that big giant drop, big fuel crash. That did a lot to shape the fortunes of the industry in the latter half of the 2010s. And that's just something that is something that we've written a lot, and some of you may be familiar with. So we can move to the next slide. And actually, for this one, I'm going to pass it over to Magna, who's going to talk a little bit more about what's going on in 2025 specifically.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jay. So just as Jay said, there have been a lot of good things this past year, namely cheap fuel and very strong premium demand. And I think also airlines cutting capacity everywhere has led to 2025 essentially being a rebound year for them. But there's also been some negatives this past year. One of them is sort of this weak economy class demand that has not only affected airlines in the US, but it has also affected airlines globally. European carriers, namely, have also reported sort of lower demand for main cabin fares coming from American travelers. And in the US, that demand has pretty much been declining for the past couple of years, but it got particularly bad this year, mostly as a result of the tariff shocks and, consumers pulling back some of their spending. And I think it also just goes into this broader point, which might be the biggest theme for 2025, is that there's this sort of bifurcated economy where you have these wealthier travelers that are very resilient to economic shocks, and they're willing to spend their dollars on first class seats, business class seats. They're still going on vacations, and like that spending is really propping up a lot of the profits in the industry right now. And then on the other hand, you have, a more sensitive traveler, more budget conscious one that, has pulled back some of their spending as a result of the tariffs. We have seen consumer spending generally on that front decline this past year. And, just going further into those tariff shocks, initially when those tariffs first rolled out in the spring, I think there was a lot of uncertainty for airlines as to how it would affect their bottom line. In the spring, we saw a lot of airlines pulling back their 2025 forecast for the year because they just did not know how consumers were going to respond. I think business travel also essentially came to a halt after it had just started rebounding for the past couple of years. But now it seems as if, again, those wealthier travelers are pretty resilient to tariffs. And again, they've been propping up a lot of that profitability. It does remain to be seen how that fares out in 2026. And, another big theme this past year has been some of the geopolitical unrest. I think namely in the Middle East, we saw several escalations in the Israel-Gaza war, which had led to more on and off service to the region from a lot of Western carriers. Now that situation seems to have mostly stabilized. And, another big thing for this past year has been air safety. We had 2 fatal plane crashes this past year, one in Washington, D.C. at the beginning of the year, and then the Air India crash this past summer, and those, 2 disasters have put air safety at the forefront. And especially in the U.S., I think there's been a big conversation about this air traffic controller shortage and how it will, affect U.S. airspace, which is already dealing with a lot of aging infrastructure. I think also a lot of those issues were really put in the spotlight this past month due to the 44-day-long government shutdown that led to a lot of staffing shortages at airports across the country. I think also another big theme for this year has been just a lot of the labor unrest that we've seen. Air Canada, for example, had one of the biggest flight attendant strikes of this past year, where they had to essentially halt service for a few days as a result of the strike. LATAM currently is experiencing a pilot strike right now. And in the US, airlines are still in negotiations with their flight attendants unions. And it, remains to be seen how those contracts will also increased labor costs for those airlines.
Thanks, Meghna. And you might be wondering, I thought we were discussing 2026. Why are we discussing 2025? It's because we inherit a lot of the problems and a lot of the opportunities that we do have in 2025. It's easy, Jay and Meghna, to think, right, new calendar going up on the wall, or nice clean slate, but it's not the case. We, of course, bring a lot of what is currently with us into the new year. Jay, you are going to present some elements. You've sort of got a list here of sort of 7 or so reasons why 2026 might be another good year for the industry. I know, Meghna, you're going to share some slightly more pessimistic perspectives in a moment, Jay. But with our viewers and listeners, Jay, tell us why there may be reasons to be optimistic going into the new year.
Right. So we entitled this presentation "Flying into Trouble," but emphasis on the question mark at the end, because we're not certainly not making any forecasts or predictions that 2026 is going to be a bad year. It might very well be as good as the last 3 or 4 years in terms of industry profitability. And there are some reasons to believe that that might be the case. One is simply that fuel prices, like I said, they're still pretty low. Nobody has any idea what's going to happen with fuel prices going into the future in 2026.
And fuel hedging has become less popular as well, Jay.
Yeah, it's fuel hedging, even if it was popular, that doesn't shield, that may protect you in the short term, but there's a cost to that. So I wouldn't even make that as a regardless of hedging or not hedging. It's when fuel prices are high, that can cause trouble. And there's at this point no reason to believe that they'll spike. I mean, but again, who knows? But so far so good on that front. And then there's that premium demand boom that we keep talking about. I can tell you, I can't remember in the past 3-4 years a single airline saying anything negative about premium demand. And you still hear airlines talk very bullishly about that segment. So, will it crack finally in 2026? Maybe, but there's just no signs of it yet. So another reason to be optimistic about 2026. At the same time, the economy globally, it may not be, growing at a fiery pace, but if you look at IMF forecasts, it's, 3% growth next year globally. A few markets that are particularly important to airlines, like India, a lot of capacity growth going in there. China, Africa, Gulf, Middle East, growing even a little bit above that average. We're certainly not in a global recession or anything like that. So, should be fine. Industry productivity continues to improve. If there's one, let's say this, the most important driver of airline industry productivity is the aircraft, new aircraft that there's nothing that really does more than that to lower an airline's unit cost. That continues. There have been delays, but new airplanes continue to replace old airplanes, new models, the Maxes, the Neos, the Dreamliners, the A350s continue to populate the global fleet. So that will continue to put downward momentum on unit cost. At the same time, we do have these, new technologies related to artificial intelligence. I'm certainly no expert on, what that will bring exactly. I can tell you that you do hear some airlines starting to talk about AI introducing some new efficiencies. For example, in customer service, I remember, I think it was Volaris this past quarter, a Mexican low-cost carrier, saying that they were able to provide a lot of customer service with AI agent software rather than expensive labor. There's examples you'll hear about AI improving maintenance productivity, things like that. Do I see AI revolutionizing airline productivity? Certainly not yet. Maybe in the future, but not yet.
Not one for 26.
No, probably not one for 2026. But things are moving fast, so who knows? This time next year, maybe we'll all see some miracle productivity improvements from the magical AI software, or maybe it'll all be a big bust. Who knows? But I'm supposed to be positive here, right? So I'm gonna
keep it positive. And Magna's going to be our downer in a moment.
Yeah, I've got the optimist role today, so I'm going to keep it positive. So we do have productivity kind of at least things pushing in that positive direction, and then we also the capacity constraints are still very much with us. We still have if you talk to most people in the aviation ecosystem, they'll tell you that these these aircraft shortages are not going away anytime in the next couple of years. Maybe even 2030s we're talking about before things get back into line. So that is going to, and you say, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's, if you ask airlines, are you happy that your aircraft are being delayed? They'll tell you, no, of course, it's frustrating. We can't plan. This is messing us up. It's all true at an individual airline level. But in the aggregate, not having enough aircraft to meet supply does wonders for your unit revenues. So that's really been an upward push on fares, on yields. And I think that's at least part of the story about why, when I said the last couple of years have been some of the best all time for airline industry profitability, I think that's a big part of it, is that these shortages have elevated yields. So you do have that. That's not changing in 2026 as far as it looks like at this point. And then the last point I have on here is that the airline industry still remains very active in the consolidation arena. And we have a slide here that just shows you how much activity is happening in all parts of the world. If you want to start in Asia, you've got the AirAsia X, kind of the whole grouping coming together, Korean Air, Asiana. You've got stuff going on in the US with Alaska kind of putting itself together with Hawaiian, and the big question of, who's going to buy Spirit Airlines, if anybody. That's an interesting discussion in and of itself. I should add, by the way, that at the Aviation Forum, for any of you attending, you can sign up. I am going to give a discussion just specifically on the U.S. market. We'll talk more about Spirit, all the stuff that's going on in the U.S. So, but that's for 2 weeks from now. We're still speaking globally here, so I'm jumping ahead of myself. So yeah, we won't unless you have any questions about that specifically today. We won't dwell on things happening in the U.S. But my only point here is that a lot of consolidation happening, and usually that provides some positive momentum for the industry, usually provides some more industry capacity discipline, usually winds up lifting fares as well. So that's could
trimming
be
a little fat, maybe.
Yeah, trimming maybe some excess capacity. I'll be more polite than you there, Gordon. I won't call it industry fat, but that's still all very, very much active. Now, as all this happy talk, I'm sure everybody's smiling right now, but now it's Magna's turn to pour ice cold water over everything I just said, and she's going to tell you why I'm completely wrong, and that bad news is coming. So go ahead, Magna. Go give us the dark scenario.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for that glowing intro, Jay. Yeah, I mean, with 2025, there have already been a lot of headwinds, which could extend into 2026. Just focusing on two of them here, I think one of the big ones that we've seen this past year are the U.S. immigration policies under the Trump administration. So far, a lot of U.S. carriers have not really seen a dent in their demand as a result of these more strict policies. Earlier this year, there were a lot of reports that for travelers that were coming into the U.S., they had harsher experiences at customs. Some people, reported being detained at the airport or having their phones searched. And I think that has had so far a small effect, at least for some of the global carriers. Turkish Airlines, they said during the summer, during their earnings call, that they were starting to see a dip in demand in inbound US travel because people were feeling a little afraid to come just as a result of some of the reporting that's been out there. KLM had also said that they were seeing that same dip, and they were seeing a dip also with international students just due to a lot of the uncertainty related to the visa policies under this administration. And then another big one are the tariffs. When that first came out in the spring, I think there was a bit of a shock. Consumer spending did go down, and there was a big decline in consumer confidence. And, airlines saw business travel demand essentially drop during that time. But now, for the most part, it seems as if things have rebounded for airlines, especially the legacy carriers. They still are reporting record revenues, that they're still very profitable, particularly because this wealthier segment of travelers, they're still buying premium products. They're still, flying transatlantic. So it remains to be seen how much that lasts in 2026, because another problem kind of going off of those tariffs is that the US dollar has been weakening this past year. So, airlines are very dependent on this very wealthy segment of travelers for their profits. But, if their dollars don't go as far when they're in Europe, for example, that might cause some pullback. So, 2026, I think, is like very up in the open as to like how these trends will maybe impact airlines and if they could potentially even get worse. I think also just again with the tariffs, there is also a question as to if companies are going to continue eating up some of the costs of the tariffs, since there has been sort of reporting on that as well. It does remain to be seen, like if, the prices of consumer goods go up quite a bit, then maybe more people are going to, rethink whether or not they should be traveling.
For sure. And a great opportunity, Meghna, just to remind our viewers that we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. So if anything Jay, Meghna and I are discussing gives you an idea for a question or even just a comment that you might have, do share that. And towards the end of the session, we'll get through as many as we can. So we've got the government policy risks there, Meghna. You've also highlighted economic risks. We saw some comments from the chief of Alphabet, the parent company of Google, just this morning speaking to the BBC about the talk of an AI bubble popping and how no company would be immune should that happen. Talk us through some of the economic risks that could materialize and influence the airline industry into 2026.
So AI has been one of the biggest things that has really propped up the stock market. I think it's also what is propping up some of this premium boom in the airline industry, is that you have a lot of people who have all this wealth. Their investments are doing well right now. They want to spend their money. But there have been growing fears of this AI bubble kind of coming up, and whether that AI bubble will pop at some point, just because this has really been fueling a lot of record returns in the stock market, which has also been juxtaposed with the very weak labor market and the labor market is sort of continuing to weaken. So, that does remain to be seen if this happens. I think also, kind of as Jay mentioned, airlines are also becoming a lot more bullish on AI for their operations. We've been hearing them talk more and more about how they are using AI in their operations and also for things like customer service, for example. We're also seeing some airlines, starting to shed jobs because of AI. Lufthansa said that they plan to cut around 4,000 jobs by 2030 as they look to use more AI and automation technologies. United Airlines also mentioned that they had shed around 4% of management jobs this past year, and they expect to shed a few more in 2026. And then also, airlines are finding other novel ways to use AI, namely Delta, which had, said earlier this year that they have a contract with a software startup to use AI to help them set fares. That was met with some controversy, but Delta has said that they are aiming to price around 20% of their domestic airfares using AI by the end of this year. Another economic risk is, of course, this premium boom, which has been lasting for the past 3 years. It still does remain to be seen if it will last again in 2026. Airlines, for the most part, are again very bullish that this premium boom is going to last. We're also seeing airlines making more investments in premium products, like American Airlines, for example, has been expanding its business class offerings. They also have started bringing back champagne to business class. You also have airlines like Frontier that are trying to introduce a version of first class seats. And those are investments that I think take time. They take years for them to be fully realized. So, it's unclear if this premium boom is really here to stay and if this is actually a fundamental structural change in this industry or if it's just cyclical. Another risk is that I think the US economy, the growth is slowing down now. It grew only 2.4% in 2024. It's only likely to grow 1.6% in 2025. Even though we're seeing lower energy prices, we are also seeing a weaker job market. I think, again, also a lot of consumers are pulling back some of their spending as well as a result of tariffs and inflation. And then another risk is also the industries that are driving a lot of the business travel. So far, airlines have reported pretty healthy demand for business travel, and a lot of that has been fueled by the professional services industries. Think finance and consulting, and also tech. United and Delta in particular have reported very strong demand among business travel. But another worry with that is the government. This past month, again, we experienced a very long government shutdown, and travel among government employees essentially came to a halt for those 44 days. Southwest Airlines had mentioned on their last earnings call that they had also started to see a pretty big decline in business travel among government adjacent employees as a result of the shutdown. So those who are working as defense contractors or consultants and just have a very close relationship with the government. That is something that we could maybe potentially expect to see more in 2026, depending on if we have more shutdowns. Congress is scheduled to negotiate again over whether to fund the government in January, and the deadline for that is January 30th. So we very well could be in that same situation again in the 2.5 months.
Back in it. Thank you for that insight, Meghna. A quick reminder that everything we're talking about today, capacity trends, demand signals, cost pressures, M&A, speculation, these are exactly the kind of insights that we cover week in, week out in Airline Weekly. So if you want what we think, Jay, we're kind of biased, but I would call it the sharpest airline analysis anywhere you can find, delivered into your inbox every Monday. Make sure you're subscribed. Our readers, and we speak, Jay, to our readers quite a lot. They are quite diverse. You've got executives, investors, analysts, everything in between. They tell us it's indispensable, and people vote with their feet. We are really, really happy to have you all joining us here today. If you are interested in learning more, if you're new to Airline Weekly, go to airlineweekly.com and stick around for a special promo code later in the session. It's definitely worth hanging around for. So with all of that in mind, Jay, and with Meghna's couple of slightly more pessimistic perspectives on 2026, let's just remind our viewers where we are wrapping up. So this is Q3 2025 from your famous earnings scoreboard, which I know is very popular on LinkedIn. Anything that our viewers and listeners should know about this?
Sure, Gordon, thanks. I'll say a few things about this slide. And for people who, if you're familiar with Airline Weekly, you'll know that we occasionally run these, or every quarter, really, we run these quote unquote earnings scoreboards. We do them by quarters. We do them annually, which is actually the more interesting thing to look at is annually. But I just pulled the Q3 numbers that we have so far. Not every airline has reported for Q3 yet. We've got most of them in, but here's kind of where we stand. And as you can see, now keep in mind, this is the summer quarter for most airlines in the northern hemisphere anyway. So it is a peak season. But if you can see Ryanair up at top, 36%. Ryanair still being Ryanair, one of the most profitable airlines in the world for decades now. And in fact, I think you guys will agree, if there was a Mount Rushmore for airlines, I think Ryanair's got to be on there, right? Right, guys?
O'Leary's face on Mount Rushmore.
we can just put the airline logo. We don't
just the airline, okay.
Yeah. So, I suppose O'Leary might want his face on there. But anyway, Ryanair number one. Pegasus number two is a Turkish low-cost carrier. They happen to just do really well in the summer because Turkey has a very large summer tourism industry. And I won't go through them all. Feel free to ask questions either today or shoot me an email if anything looks funny, or why is that airline doing so poorly or doing so well? Just call one more thing to your attention. You can see at the very bottom of this list are kind of the four big troubled low-cost carriers in the U.S. right now: Southwest, JetBlue, Frontier, Spirit. That's been a real unique. I kind of alluded to this earlier in a couple slides back. I said that the U.S. low-cost carriers are having a heck of a time in the post-pandemic period. A few exceptions to that. I think Allegiant's done a little better. Sun Countries, it's kind of its own creature. But these four airlines are still struggling. they've all undertaken rather, very, very big turnaround efforts that we'll see over the next coming years. Maybe, we'll learn a lot in 2026, whether their turnaround efforts bear fruit. And certainly when I talk about the U.S. airlines in my presentation at the forum, we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. But take a look at that on your own and see if there's anything that you want to ask about. But the general theme here is that, airlines are still, most of them are still making pretty good money. So there's that.
To set the scene for the Q&A, Jay, you've rounded up some big questions here for 2026. Some of these are evergreen, and some of these are a little bit more regional specific. Just talk us through some of these in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so just a few to come to mind. I mean, there's some questions that, as you said, they're evergreen. You could, anytime you're thinking about how the airline industry is going to unfold in the future, you're thinking about what's the fuel price going to be. So that's, one thing that's on everybody's mind always. And then that big one that Meghna and I just keep talking about over and over and over. You guys are probably tired of us saying it, but that premium demand, will it hold? Is it something that's just structurally different? Is it, and airlines will tell you this, Delta, United, they'll tell you, American, that it's just, we're in a different world now. People just want their premium. They want to fly premium. That's the way the world is now. It's a structural change. Or is it a cyclical change? Did we just go through a couple of years of, very, very strong asset price appreciation and, people getting wealthy off of their stock portfolios and their cryptocurrencies and their home prices? And speaking more about the US there too, but I think some of that as international relevance, does that all fall apart if there's a recession, if there's a global recession, if there's a big US recession? And Meghna talked about some of those, talked about that in some detail earlier. And then that other big question, will aircraft supply constraints start to ease? As I mentioned, the consensus is that, we're not going to get a resolution to this supply shortage in the next couple of years, but will it get better? You are starting to hear, for example, Pratt and Whitney neo engine operators say that we're kind of past the worst. We've had all these geared turbofan engines that need inspections, and we had 20 of these grounded on average in 2025, and that's starting to get better. That's going to get better in 2026 and even better in 2027. That's not the universal assessment, but you are starting to hear more of that. I think JetBlue is a good example of that. A few others. So, will that get better? Then there's just some regional questions that, when I was doing the slide, I just pulled off the top of my head. We can, this one you can go on forever, but I mentioned the US LCCs. That's a big question for 2026. Will they start to get their mojo back, their pre-pandemic mojo back? Maybe, maybe not. Is there too much Gulf capacity? We have a lot of planes coming into markets like Saudi Arabia is probably a prime example of that. But we also had, I know Gordon, I'm sure some of you have caught Gordon's interview with the Etihad CEO recently. They're starting to grow pretty aggressively again. The Dubai Air Show, which is happening right now, there's been some big orders coming out of there. I mean, a lot of that capacity won't come online for, maybe 2030. So that's not really a question for 2026, but there is, we should get a lot of capacity in that region. Indigo is just an interesting, it's a specific airline. I didn't want to really call out anything too specific, but Indigo is a special case because they might very well be the most ambitious airline in the world right now, given all of the overseas expansion that they're doing, the very, very elevated rates of ASK capacity growth, the new business class, the new overseas routes, the new loyalty program. They're really trying to aggressively capture Indian traffic that currently goes through the Gulf hubs, for example. And readers will know we've written a lot about that. We've talked a lot about that on the podcast, Gordon and I. So that's another interesting question. And finally, I mentioned here, as I mentioned before, will there be some more exciting new deals? Is Delta going to merge with United? Just kidding on that one. But
are you a betting man, Jay?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to bet on that. Yeah, I'm not going to bet on that one. But I just, that was just to keep people, in case people are dozing off. I had to keep people awake there. But
you heard it here first.
Probably not a Delta United merger, but there could be. Everybody's watching Spirit, as I mentioned, and then TAP Air Portugal in your backyard, Gordon, is are they going to be purchased by one of the big airline groups in Europe? Turkish Airlines just invested in Spain's Air Europa. Might they be interested in doing more deals? Who knows? So that is something to keep an eye on for 2026.
Awesome. I think that sets the scene perfectly for our Q&A. But before we get into the audience questions, a quick reminder, if you do want to dive deeper into all of this and hear from the most influential industry leaders, don't miss the Skift Aviation Forum. That's back in just 2 weeks' time. That's December 3rd in Fort Worth, Texas. It's our flagship aviation event at Skift. And last year, it was a complete sellout. So as a thanks for joining us today, we're offering an exclusive 15% off code. It's webinar attendee. Stick around to the end, and we've got a QR code as well for you there if that's easier. But just framing the Q&A, I'm looking through the list of speakers that are due to join us. We've got everyone from the CEOs, Joanna Geraghty from JetBlue, David Neilman of Breeze Airways, but also some really, really interesting C-suite executives. Like we've got Tom Doxey, the CFO of Southwest, joining us. We've got David Seymour, the Chief Operating Officer at American Airlines, Jason Berry, the CEO of Alaska. We've got David Kinzelman, the Chief Commercial Officer at United. So many more. Go to live.skift.com for the full agenda. It's really, really impressive. And I think, Jay and Meghna, you joined us at the Aviation Forum last year. It's going to be, I think, one of our strongest lineups ever, just in terms of the variety of perspectives that we're getting. There's some names here that I haven't heard speak publicly at any point this year, any industry gathering or event. So some really unique, fresh perspectives, as well as those household names that we know and love. There's actually one question here which aligns neatly to some of our guest speakers. We've got Air Canada. We've got Kevin Jackson from Porter Airlines in Canada, and Eric Tanner, the Chief Commercial Officer from Flair, due to join us. C. Katz on LinkedIn asks, what about Air Canada, Porter, Flair, WestJet in Canada, origin demand to the US? All I keep reading is that Canadian travel to the US is down. Meghna, you've been following some of the transborder trends between Canada and the US, and to a lesser extent, Mexico. What have you been hearing in the latest earnings calls around demand across the US to Canada, vice versa, and everything in between?
Yeah, so demand, like US Canada demand has definitely weakened this past year, which I think could be pretty much traced to some of the rhetoric that came out of the Trump administration about Canada and also the tariff policies. So you definitely have seen a pretty big decline. United and Delta have also reported that transborder travel for them has been down generally this year, but it hasn't really made a big enough dent to their bottom line just because the vast majority of their customers are from the US. I think also that decline in Canadian travel to the US is kind of apparent, even just from a tourism perspective. We're seeing also cities like Las Vegas that are struggling because Canadians are not traveling there. I've also have heard from some of the Canadian airlines that they have, paused some of their marketing campaigns to the US because Canadians have not been interested in traveling to the US right now. However, that doesn't mean that they haven't been expanding. I believe Porter, for example, did roll out a set of US routes for the summer. So people are still traveling, but it's definitely just not as strong as it has been in past years.
For sure. And we saw some developments at Billy Bishop Airport, Air Canada going in there to compete on some of the transborder routes. Jay, any insights to add on US-Canada demand and how you see that playing out into the new year?
No, I think Meghna covered it well. I'll only add that, I think some of the Canadian airlines have said that it's more of the southbound leisure demand that's the most affected market. I think the business holding up a little bit better. And then also, a very important component of that US-Canada air travel market is people connecting, Americans going somewhere overseas, Europe, Asia, Middle East, whatever, through a Canadian hub, through Toronto, through Vancouver, through Montreal. that stuff I think is holding up okay as well.
Got it. I know you are an economics geek as well as an aviation geek, Jay. So I think
We've
there's
got
one
two of
place.
us here. Megna's not going to get out of this one.
As an economics question here from someone joining us on LinkedIn: is the weaker USD against many currencies, except a handful of options there, hurting travel demands? How are currencies and FX more broadly influencing the airline industry, and maybe any clues that we can see going into 26, Jay?
Sure, I'll start, and Megna, if you want to add anything. Yeah, so we had a period of a couple of years where the U.S. dollar was very strong versus most foreign currencies, and that contributed to a lot of U.S. buying power abroad. So that very much fueled a lot of outbound U.S. demand, and that was very helpful to U.S. airlines. It was also very helpful to any foreign airlines flying to the United States. You'll hear, airlines from Europe to Asia to Australia say, yeah, we benefited a lot by selling tickets in the U.S. to tourists or business, mostly tourist people coming here. So the question is now, recently the dollar has been weakening. So does that have a reverse effect? And I think the inevitable answer is yes, to at least some extent. We'll see over the coming quarters how much. Now, we've already seen, I think Megna mentioned it, is in the economy class segment of international demand out of the U.S. That's been kind of weak, really, since springtime of this year, and some of that may be currency. So yeah, it's a factor for sure.
Megna, anything to add on currency and the USD generally?
Yeah, I mean, I will add that at least so far, like airline CEOs don't seem to be worried about a weakening dollar. I think whenever it has come up in any earnings calls right now, they're just like, all we're seeing is really high premium demand. So it'll be interesting to see if this weaker dollar also does make some of these wealthier travelers rethink whether or not they should be traveling. But at least right now, like, this doesn't really seem to be a consideration, at least among the US airlines.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing too. Just remember, this is not specifically about demand, which I think is what the question was going at. But on the cost side, if you're a non-US airline, you're paying most of your costs. Think about fuel, think about your aircraft, a lot of your debt, whatever, is going to be in dollars. So you prefer the dollars to be weak. So that's actually been a nice, helpful tailwind for airline profitability going into 26, the weaker dollar. So, it depends on every currency is going to have its own thing, but that's actually a positive thing. Most airlines in the world, at least on the cost side, they like the weak dollar. They want to have a strong currency that they can purchase things in, purchase aviation inputs with their strong currency. So that's good.
It can work both ways. Another question here from someone joining us on LinkedIn about the impact of non-air revenue, in particular loyalty. I know, Megna, this is something you've been following closely on the earnings calls, co-branded credit cards, in particular in the US, but also more broadly. Talk our viewers and listeners through these key trends in 25 and how they may influence things into 2026. Loyalty alone is an enormous driver, and that's before we consider the broader ancillary revenues.
Yeah, loyalty, I think, is just very interesting right now for the airline industry, especially on the premium end. For the most part, all the major airlines have been reporting consistent increases in loyalty spend. And I think also, I want to say like American said that only a third maybe of their customers might not be affiliated with their loyalty program. So, I mean, it's a very important part for airlines and sort of like cultivating, again, like that loyalty. One of the things that I think has been really interesting this past year is Delta was saying that, their deal with American Express is also starting to now influence like which markets they enter, because they want to attract, again, like that wealthier traveler that will consistently fly with Delta. I believe Delta mentioned on their latest earnings call that they have been looking to expand in markets like Austin and Raleigh, just based off of like credit card spend. So it's just definitely becoming an even more important part for airlines, I mean, even with like United and Delta too, for example, they've both been raising their annual fees on their credit card portfolios, but that hasn't really seemed to stop people from signing up for them or continuing to spend on them. American Airlines, I think, is taking a little bit of a different approach. They recently rolled out a more like mid-tier card. It's, $350 annual fee. So I don't know if that's exactly maybe mid-tier, but in their portfolio, it's mid-tier. And they want to kind of appeal more to these travelers that are not, just like these frequent flyers, but also leisure travelers. So they're going in for that in-between market. Alaska Airlines too, for example, they've completely revamped their loyalty program following the merger with Hawaiian Airlines. And I think they're also going for a more premium shift, as you've seen with the legacy carriers.
For sure. Another question here. Feel free, anyone, to field this one. Which regions do you think will see the biggest growth in air travel next year, Jay? We've got the usual hot candidates, but is there anywhere in particular that we should be keeping an eye out for in 2026?
Yeah, I mentioned India and the Gulf Middle East earlier. Those are regions with a lot of capacity coming in. They're regions with elevated GDP growth. They're also regions with, particularly in the Gulf, you have a lot of tourism investment and just, business investment in general. So a lot of activity there. I think some of the the real giant markets like US, Europe, China, I think the growth will be more moderate there as it was in 2025. I mean, the US is definitely not a growth market. That's one thing, for sure. There are certain elements within the US. I mean, premium segment again. I said it again. We should ring a bell every time I say premium.
We'd be very rich if we had $1 in the jar every time we said premium.
So, but that's a growth segment. But so in terms of, if your question is about individual countries, I think you'll see probably the most elevated growth in, like I mentioned, India stands out. Maybe the Gulf region. Trying to think, there might be some Southeast Asian, ASEAN region. Places like, I don't know, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, places that maybe are still playing a little bit of catch up from capacity and demand that was lost during, pre-COVID or during COVID. So, a good example might be, so Thailand. So Chinese tourism to Thailand is still well below where it was in 2019. And, there's different reasons for that. I'm not sure those reasons are going to go away in 2026. But I just saw today, for example, that, China and Japan are having, Meghna mentioned how geopolitical disputes can always interfere with airline, growth and profitability. I saw today, China and Japan are having kind of another dispute. And so there's some talk that maybe Chinese tourists will stop going in as large a number to Japan and may divert back to Thailand, for example. So you may see some growth rates from, shifts like that. So yeah, I think, I don't know if you have anything to add, Meghna. Did I miss any off top of your head?
No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I feel like with the US, if anything, I think like a lot of the capacity has been shrinking just because they've been trying to accommodate some of that weaker economy demand. And then also Spirit Airlines too has been shrinking quite a bit this past year, even though there have been more expansions into premium seats.
But there are definitely some individual, very scorching hot growth markets. You can go around. The hottest market in the US right now is probably Nashville, Tennessee. Very, very strong and fast growing economy. Bunch of reasons for that. Won't get into, but there are regions like that. You mentioned a couple. I mean, Austin's cooled off a little bit, but that's been hot over the past couple of years. I think the other one you mentioned, Meghna, in the context of Delta, is Raleigh-Durham. That's another hot market. So if you want to go, drill down into individual airports, there's plenty of those.
For sure. And we should say Peyton Boutier, our Asia editor, she's been doing some great reporting on the travel demands between China, Japan, Thailand, and other parts of the world there. So check out skift.com if you're looking for a bit more background information on that. Time for a few final questions. One here around consolidation. I'll kick off with you, Jay, maybe because I know you wrote a feature for Airline Weekly on this relatively recently, but feel free to chime in. Meghna, are regulators getting more relaxed or tighter with consolidation? Are they allowing M&As that they may have previously said absolutely not 5-10 years ago? What's your picture here?
Well, we've seen, a couple of examples in the past few years of regulators indeed getting stricter. We saw the JetBlue Spirit merger denied by a judge on antitrust grounds.
Well, even the Northeast Alliance as well. Yeah.
And the Northeast Alliance as well. Good point. Yeah, those American and JetBlue trying to not quite merge, but get something close to a merger, I think I can say, just, to actually, coordinate pricing and things like that. So that was struck down. And then we have over in Europe, IAG very much wanted to buy Air Europa. They, in fact, did buy some shares, but ultimately they received signals from antitrust authorities in the EU that was not going to fly. So we saw that potential deal go by the wayside. So there are examples. There's always this question about whether, the change in administrations in the US, will the Trump administration be more amenable to approving consolidation than the Biden administration? The Biden administration was pretty actively, very aggressive in their antitrust enforcement. Will the Trump administration be less aggressive? I don't think we really know. I mean, I think the reflexive kind of answer is, Republican administrations tend to be a little bit more hands-off. But, I can give an example like from another industry. There's a giant railroad merger that's pending right now. And I would say that it's definitely not a slam dunk that the Trump administration would say yes. So I don't know. I think it really does depend on the deal. I think with so many low-cost carriers struggling right now, I think there'd be more of a bias towards letting them consolidate to sort of help themselves. I think maybe if you go back when the JetBlue merger was rejected, I think at that time it was before it became obvious that low-cost carriers were going to be struggling. And I think there was more of a, I think the paradigm at that time, the thinking at that time was that airlines had gone, the entire decade of the 2010s, for better or for worse, getting bigger and getting stronger and making money. I mean, 2010s was a very good year for the U.S. good decade for the U.S. airline industry in terms of profitability. And so I think there was in 2022 a different attitude than there might be in 2026. So it's a little bit of a, I'm bouncing around there, not giving you a definitive answer.
It's a complex subject.
But it's a complicated subject.
Lots of nuance.
We require some, a little bit dancing around. So I don't know, Meghna, maybe Meghna can come in with a stronger, more definitive statement than I did.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mostly agree with you. I will say, at least with the first Trump administration, they were the ones that did approve like the Northeast Alliance. And I think the Biden administration was unique in its approach to antitrust enforcement and that they were a lot more aggressive, because I don't think any other presidential administrations in the past were as aggressive as the Biden administration. But it does also seem as if the current antitrust chief in the Trump administration, she does seem to have a generally more aggressive view towards mergers, especially at least in the tech industry. I'm not sure how that could apply to airlines if we do see any potential airline mergers in the next 4 years or so.
Yeah, and I think Vice President Vance has made comments like that as well. So, commenting that there may be too much consolidation in certain industries. So, yeah, it's really, really hard to say. I think it'll just be a case by case basis. Yeah. Now, I think the most likely, again, I joked before, Delta's going to merge with America. That's not going to happen. But, I think the more likely merger would be, let's say, Frontier and Spirit get together. I can't imagine that being subject to too much antitrust scrutiny. Would Southwest buy a JetBlue or something? I mean, who knows? Would that be?
We speculate, Jay, but
we're going a little too far into speculation land, right? Thanks for stopping me there, Gordon.
Not at all. We'll have some informed speculation in the upcoming issues of Airline Weekly. And as we said, we had actually Barry Biffle, the Frontier CEO, at our global forum in New York in September. Some great comments from him. Speaking to Peter Greenberg, go back through the Skift archives if you want to see what was said there. And of course, we got some very big names from the US industry joining us in Dallas. Very quickly before we go, complete this sentence for me, both of you. Meghna, the airline industry in 2026 will be ...
A wait and watch year. I mean, like 2025, I think was for the most part ended up being good, but there was a lot of speculation before that it would just be a wash because of all the economic instability going on. And I think it's fair to say that those trends are still going to continue in 2026. And I'm a little bit skeptical of how long things like the premium boom are going to last or how resilient it truly is in the face of things like tariffs and this also potential AI bubble that we might be seeing right now.
Jay, 2026 for the airline industry in a word, if not a sentence?
Kind of stole mine, Meghna. I was going to say shaped by the resilience of the premium boom.
Thank you for that. Well, our time is nearly up, but I've had a few direct messages whilst we've been on asking for that Skift Aviation Forum QR code again. There it is in all of its glory. For the full agenda, visit live.skift.com. And a reminder that last year's event was a complete sellout. So we do encourage you now to book to avoid disappointment. And if you are looking for more information about Airline Weekly, go to airlineweekly.com. And here we go. As promised, there is a huge 50% off promotion code for new subscribers in their first year. And if you are looking for enterprise or group deals, feel free to reach out to our subscriptions guru, Rachel Mines. She's fantastic. She is available at rm@skift.com. But that brings us to the end of today's conversation. A huge thank you to Jay and Meghna for their insights, and also the team behind the scenes here at Skift, including Monica, Nicole, Camille, Beatrice, and so many others. And importantly, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in Fort Worth on December 3rd for the Skift Aviation Forum. A reminder, live.skift.com for all the details. Bye for now.